I'm somebody who enjoys going to thrift stores and occasionally pawn shops. I love saving money and finding good deals. I buy a lot of used items, and I've probably saved lots of money over the years. I occasionally like to browse Facebook Marketplace for good deals on stuff. There usually is most of the things I don't want or need, so I don't buy. But every now and then I find a deal that's too good to pass up. This story takes place about 6 months ago. Up until that point, I had probably purchased about 3 or 4 things on Facebook Marketplace. All of the experiences had been good to that point. As I was scrolling through the items for sale one day, I came across an iPhone. It was unlocked, meaning it could work with any service provider. All you needed was the SIM card. This was 2 generations newer than mine, and it was a very reasonable price. I kind of needed a new phone, plus there were no noticeable problems to it, and it's said to be in new condition. It was a new listing as well, so I was excited. I tried to jump on it fast. I reached out to the seller, who responded back to me rather quickly. He was a man and was not all that far away. I tried to make arrangements to buy the phone as soon as possible and said whenever he was free would work for me as well. We agreed to meet the next day at a nearby Target store. This was the biggest and most popular store in the area, and it was also close to us both. The next day I drove to Target with the money, and I was excited to buy my new phone. I knew that I was getting a really good deal. I arrived about 10 minutes before the meeting and went inside Target. After walking around for a while, the time came. I sent a message letting the seller know that I was inside the Target. I was looking around, but I couldn't find him. After about 10 more minutes went by, he finally texted me back. He apologized and said that something had come up and he couldn't make it that night. I was disappointed, but I told him, okay, maybe tomorrow. I decided to leave Target then and not get anything. After going back to my car and driving away, I was followed for several miles by a blue 4-door sedan. Of course, I suspected maybe it was the same guy who was selling me the phone and this was some kind of setup. Maybe I'm paranoid, but when buying things on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, those kind of things always pop into my head. I couldn't tell who was driving the car behind me, but it did look to be a male. I didn't want him following me all the way home, and I decided to pull over on the side of the road. It was a standard and somewhat busy road, and at first, the car behind me started to pull over as well, but when I came to a full stop, he then pulled back onto the road and sped past me. I tried to look inside the car when he passed by, but I didn't get a very good look at all. After the car passed me by, I waited and watched it go out of sight. Then I got back onto the road and drove the rest of the way back home to my house. After getting back and going inside, it wasn't long before I glanced out the window and happened to see the same car. It was going extremely slow down the road. I ducked down so he wouldn't see me. The car passed by my house and then went out of sight. About a minute later, I saw it driving back from the other direction. It didn't stop at my house or anything, but it was driving really slow. I just hoped that guy didn't know where I lived. After that, I decided to block the seller on Facebook. I had no interest in buying the phone anymore. To this day, I don't know for sure if that was the same person who was following me home or driving down my street. I do think it was the seller from Facebook, though. I also don't think he knows my exact address, but he somehow figured out the street that I live on. Either way, nothing strange happened and I'm glad to say everything's been fine since last year. Last year, I put my pool table on Facebook Marketplace. I had it in my basement and it wasn't in the greatest of shape, plus I never really used it. It was taking up a lot of space and I knew I needed to get rid of it. I listed it on Facebook Marketplace for a price that was pretty high. I was in a huge hurry to sell it, but I wanted to get a good price for it. It wasn't a crazy high price, but you could probably find a nicer pool table for a little less if you tried. After listing it, the pool table received no interest. I wasn't surprised, and after a few weeks went by, I got the first message about it. It was a guy named Jim and he told me right away that he wanted to buy the pool table. We messaged back and forth for a little while and then made an appointment for Jim to come by and purchase the pool table. I really hadn't expected to sell it for this price and figured that Jim would try to negotiate when he got to my house. I had a set price in my head that I was willing to go down to. Jim came over at about 6 p.m. on a weeknight after work. When he got to my house, I let him in and then showed him down to the basement where the pool table was. He looked at it for a few minutes and then agreed to buy it. I watched him take out all the cash of the full listing price and then give it to me. I was shocked, but more than happy to accept it. I told Jim that it was his now and I would help him load it into his truck. Luckily, he had a pretty big pickup truck and it would just fit. It was a bit of a pain to move the coffee table into his truck, but we got it done. He then left and I felt really good about the price that I had gotten. I truly didn't think that I would be able to sell the table for that much after this. Almost 2 weeks went by. Then I got a message from Jim. He told me that he felt that he had gotten ripped off and he could have gotten a better deal. Now this was over a week later, so I wasn't going to take the table back. I told him it's been over a week and a deal is a deal. This obviously didn't make Jim very happy. He argued with me for a while, telling me to give him some money back, but I refused. I didn't have to give him anything, and he should have tried to negotiate or looked around for a better deal if he really wanted one. I felt that this wasn't my responsibility to help him out. We ended up leaving the conversation on not a very good note, but I felt that it was over. A few days went by and Jim didn't reply to me at all. Then things got strange. My girlfriend was over at my house one night for dinner, and at one point she got up from the table and told me that she saw some guys standing in the front yard. I got up and we both walked over near the window. When we got there, I didn't see anybody, but I did notice a white truck parked out on the street. I realized that it was Jim's truck. I remembered it from when I helped him load the pool table. In it I told my girlfriend of the story of how he was mad about the price. We looked all around the house through the windows, but we couldn't find Jim. We were going from window to window, and when I finally returned to the front of the house, I opened the front door. As I did, I saw the truck starting up and drive away. I decided to message Jim and tell him that I knew he was at my house, but when I went online to do so, he had blocked me. 2 nights later he was prowling around outside again. This time I was by myself and in the living room watching TV. I noticed out of the corner of my eye a man walking past the front window. About a minute later I heard my front doorknob turn, but thankfully it was locked. I didn't waste any time and I called the police. However, Jim left pretty soon after I did, and he was long gone before the police got there. I told them the whole situation and asked what they could do. After that, I felt confident that the police would be able to look into it and I wouldn't have any problems from Jim again. But the very next morning as I left my house to go to work, I was walking to my car. Right as I was about 5 feet from my driver's door, I heard somebody sprinting behind me. I looked around to see Jim running at me with full force. I chose to run back into my house instead of going for my car door. This gave me a slight amount of distance on Jim, and I somehow made it inside right before he got to the door. This time he was really mad. He tried opening my front door and then went to the window when it was locked, and he started banging on my window. I called the police again, who arrived in a very fast time when Jim was still there. He was caught and luckily didn't do any damage to my house. This experience caused me to stop using Facebook Marketplace for the time being. I know there are many good people who use it, but I would recommend anybody to not give out your address and be careful. I was selling an old coffee table on Facebook Marketplace. I was only asking $40 for it and it was in good shape, but it was nothing too special. It was kind of old, so I figured it was a reasonable price. It took a while to receive any kind of interest. After a couple of weeks though, I did get one person who asked about it. It was a guy named Spike. He asked me if I was willing to do $30 for the table. I said sure, I was happy to get anything for it, and if it didn't sell, I would probably just give it to Goodwill. He asked when would be a good time for him to come over and pick it up. I told him the next night between 5 and 7 p.m. would be fine if it worked for him. He agreed to the time and I gave him my address. I was happy to finally get rid of the old table. The next day, I moved my table to right inside my front door so it would be easy for Spike to just grab it and go after paying me. When 5 o'clock came, I hadn't received any kind of messages from Spike, so I assumed that he would be there any time. However, as time went by, it was soon 7 o'clock and Spike didn't show up. I decided to go on Facebook and message Spike to see if he was still coming. When I got onto Facebook though, I saw that Spike had blocked me. This was really confusing. Our conversations had gone great and I didn't understand why he would do that. Still, I guess he just wouldn't buy my coffee table and I put it back. I kept the listing up in hopes that maybe somebody else would buy it, but things remained quiet. Fast forward to about a week later. It was a normal weeknight and I was in my living room. I was just about to get ready for bed and it was probably like 10 or 11 at night. That's when I heard my back door rattling. I live alone and I wasn't expecting anybody, plus, I rarely use the back door. Immediately I had a bad feeling. I started walking over to my kitchen area, which is in the back of the house and is where the back door is. I was maybe halfway there when I heard the sound of glass breaking. It was also coming from that same area. That's when I froze right where I was, and I turned around and dashed for the hallway. I ran for my bedroom, which had a locking door. I got inside and locked myself in. Meanwhile, in my house I heard some noises in the kitchen. I knew that somebody had broken in, and my first response once inside my room was to call the police. I tried to be as quiet as I could when doing so. As I was speaking with the 911 operator, I was also hearing footsteps inside. I moved all the way into my closet. I was told that the police would be there as soon as they could. Once I was off the phone with the police, I stopped hearing noises throughout the house. I was in there being as quiet as I could and hoping that I did not hear any more noises. Eventually, the police arrived and made their way inside. It wasn't until I was sure it was safe that I left my closet and bedroom. Whoever had been in my house, though, was gone. The police couldn't find them anywhere. I did, however, see the broken window and the damage that it caused. The area was searched, but police never found anybody. That really creeps me out. To this day, I really think that it was Spike who broke in. I had just given him my address the week prior, and why would he block me so randomly? I gave the information to the police, but I never got any word if they found him or if it was in fact Spike who broke into my house. My first job was at the gas station down the street from my high school. I worked Thursday and Friday evenings. Every week. My shifts were 6 p.m. until midnight. Even though the schedule did interfere with my schoolwork, my parents allowed it because they thought it would be good for me to get some work experience. After my first few weeks on the job, I would be alone for the last 2 hours of my shift. There was another guy who would be there until 10 p.m. That was fine with me because it was usually really dead by that time. I was standing behind the counter staring at my phone. One night at around 11 p.m. Suddenly the door opened and a man walked in. He was tall, probably 6'2", with a long dirty coat and sunglasses. He wore a brimmed hat and also had a long beard, so I couldn't really see much of his face. My first thought was that he was going to rob the place, because it looked like he had made some effort to conceal his appearance. The guy slowly walked up and down the aisles. Then he stood in the back of the store next to the coffee machine. He just stood there. He didn't buy anything, and he never said a word to me or so much as looked in my direction. At 5 minutes to close, he simply walked out the front door the way he came. I didn't even have to ask him to leave. I was relieved when he left, but obviously creeped out. Why would anybody just stand in a store for an hour without buying anything? I guess it was not technically against any of our rules, but it was incredibly frightening for me, especially since I was alone. On my next shift, I asked my coworker if he had seen anything similar. Since he was more experienced than me, I figured he might have seen the guy before. My coworker told me that he had never seen anybody like that. That night, when I was alone again, the same creepy guy came in and did the same thing. He walked in the front door at around 10:30 p.m. and stood there silently. Several customers came in during that time, but I suppose it would not look as strange to them, since they were only in there for a minute or two. Just like last time, he left without any incident 5 minutes before close. Over my next few shifts, the same thing happened each and every time I came to expect it. From time to time, I would try to talk to the guy, but he would never respond. He wouldn't even look at me. I stood behind the counter one night. The creepy guy was standing on the other side of the store, as usual. I can't even describe how awkward it was being alone with this guy night after night. We had probably spent over 10 hours together alone collectively since I started the job. Just like usual, he left a few minutes before closing time. After he left, I walked over to the front door and locked it. Then I spent the next half hour or so on my closing routine. I emptied the garbage cans and did a quick sweep of the floors. Then I emptied the cash register and got it ready for deposit on my way home. When I stepped out of the store, I looked out to see my car alone in the dark parking lot. I was parked on the far side, past the pumps. I started walking towards my car, and suddenly I started to feel like I was being watched. Just then, someone ran out from the darkness and stood in front of me, blocking my car. It was that same guy from before, the one who just stood there in the store with me every night. As soon as I saw him, I ran back to the store, unlocked the door and scurried inside. When I was in there, I locked the door and called my dad for help. While I was waiting, I looked out the large glass window at the front and I could see that the guy was still standing in the exact spot where I last saw him. He hadn't moved. After about 10 minutes, my dad's car pulled up and his headlights fell upon the guy. The guy's face was completely lit for a split second, and when that happened, he took off running. To this day, I have no idea where he went. That was the last time I ever worked at that gas station, and from then on, I refused to take any night shifts at my other jobs. The people you run into are just way too scary. I have no idea who that guy was or what he wanted, but in my opinion, he was not all there, and I don't know what he was capable of. When I was 20 years old, I was working at a gas station on the other side of town from where I lived. I had recently finished high school, and I took the night shift as a way to make extra money, since my main job didn't pay very much. The gas station was open all night, but my shift was from 7 p.m. until midnight, which worked out well since my other job ended at 5. Sounds like a rough schedule, and it was, but if I'm being completely honest, the work was really easy. It was made even better by the fact that I really got along with all my coworkers. The actual store never got very busy, since most people would pay at the pump anyway. The night was usually a combination of scrolling through Instagram and cracking jokes with my coworker, occasionally being interrupted by a customer asking where the bathroom is. The late shifts always had 2 workers, not because it was busy, but for safety reasons. It's always best to have another person around to watch your back, and my coworkers and I took this responsibility very seriously. This incident took place on a Thursday night at around 11 p.m. It was me and one other guy, John. He was younger than me, 18, I think, and he was still in high school. He had short red hair and a smooth face. I don't think he even needed to shave yet. I'd been working there longer than him, and we had kind of a big brother-little brother dynamic between us. He would ask me how to do everything, even though I'm pretty sure he was smart enough to figure it out for himself. It was the middle of August, and even though it was late at night, the store was incredibly hot. Because of that, we would often prop open the door to the back alley. That way there would be some nice airflow whenever someone walked in the front door, always a welcome relief from the summer heat. All that being said, John and I had a great time talking and joking around. When the store was empty during the late hours, I was at the front of the store tidying up some of the shelves, and John was in the back organizing the stockroom when I noticed two cars pull up to the front of the store. One of them was an old sedan with some noticeable rust spots on the body. The other was a white minivan with tinted windows. The minivan went to one of the pumps and the car was parked in one of the spots at the front. I quickly finished what I was doing and made my way back to the counter in case one of them needed to pay for something. At this point, I was not sure if the two were together. I suspected that they probably were, because very few customers come in at this hour and two vehicles coming at the same time was unusual, to say the least. I waited for a few minutes, and eventually a single man walked into the store. He was a short guy, probably 30 years old and thin as a twig. He was wearing a white tank top and baggy blue jeans that seemed at least a few sizes too big. He looked straight at me with a blank look on his face. The man walked towards me, not breaking eye contact. As he approached the counter, I saw him reach behind his back, and before I knew it, I was staring down the barrel of a handgun. The store had a silent alarm that could be activated discreetly, but I was a few steps away from it and I couldn't risk making a move. John was in the back, and I knew he could hear whatever was going on in the store. So I said loudly, "No problem, sir. Don't shoot. Take whatever you want." That should have been enough for John to call the police. However, when I said that, the man rolled his eyes and smiled. Then he looked over to the side. I turned to look in the same direction, and what I saw was an unconscious John being carried out from the back by a second man. He must have come in through the open back door. That was when they asked for the money. I promptly opened the cash register and emptied it into a bag and handed it to one of them. Then I filled another bag with all the lottery tickets and handed that to him as well. The man holding John then said to me that if I didn't call the police, they would let him go safely. After that, both men walked out the front door, one of them still carrying John, and both cars took off. I stood there for what felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. I hesitated to call the police because of what the man said. However, I soon decided that I needed to call them, so I dialed 911 and reported the incident. The police arrived within minutes and reviewed the security footage. I waited as patiently as I could, considering the circumstances. Not long after, one of the officers told me that they were able to see the license plate from one of the cars. Not the smartest criminals, I guess. Later that night, I learned that both men were caught by the police, and I was brought into the station to identify them. A tremendous sense of relief washed over my entire body when I saw both those guys standing in a lineup. I quickly chose the two men who were not clever enough to cover their faces. After that, I asked one of the officers where John was. He looked at me with a solemn expression and placed his right hand on my shoulder. Then he told me that John had never been found. Search parties worked day and night for the next several days, but they turned up nothing and eventually they were called off. To this day, no one knows what happened to him because neither of the men ever talked and no evidence was found. It has weighed heavily on my conscience ever since. John and I were meant to watch out for each other, and I can't help but feel that I failed him. I always wonder if things would have turned out differently had I not called the police, as one of the men said. Maybe they would have let him go, maybe not. This story takes place one night when I stopped for gas on my way home from work. I worked at a restaurant, so I was usually there until late, sometimes after midnight. This time it was about 11:30 at night. I would pass this gas station every day on my way home from work, and I'm pretty sure it was open 24/7. The store part of the gas station was bigger than most. It was almost like a tiny grocery store because it had a decent selection of food, not just the junk food and snacks like some others. This place even had a tiny produce aisle. Because of that, I would often pick up some things there after filling up my car, since other places in the area were usually closed at the time. I was walking down the aisles of the store while my car was parked outside. I filled my basket with a few of the essentials that I always buy: bananas, eggs and bread. Then I walked around for a while, trying to decide if there was anything else that I wanted. I eventually made my way to the till and paid for my gas as well as the grocery items. Then I walked out the large glass door at the front of the store. I could see that my car was parked next to one of the pumps. The parking lot was dark, but the bright lights from the gas pumps were like a bright oasis. I started walking towards my car, and as I got closer, I could tell that there was somebody sitting in my back seat. I don't usually lock my doors when I go in because it's usually pretty quick, but this time I was in there for a while longer than normal. Also, my car is pretty old, so you have to lock them all manually. I know it's not smart, but those are my excuses, so take it for what you will. I inched closer to get a look at the person. It appeared to be an older woman hunched over. Back when I was about 16 years old, because of my living situation, at least twice a month I'd have to make a 2-hour drive from a city area back to my parents' house in a rural area. I'd say about 90 minutes of that drive was just country road with nothing but valley corn or some other crop on either side, with the occasional farmhouse or something that you think people might go in and out of willingly along the way. Because of how used to this drive I'd already been beforehand, I didn't think much of driving. That long stretch of no cell service, no phone booth area, nothing had happened yet, so surely nothing would happen ever. Right in the middle of one of those drives back, while the night was slowly taking over, as I was driving, I saw a flash of light that was weird. Maybe just a momentary anemic moment. Another flash. Well, maybe someone coming this way has their high beams wonky or something. Another flash. All right. Something's wrong. I slow down a bit so as not to get blinded periodically and swerve off the road and try to figure out what was ahead. Further in the distance, I think I see a person actually multiple my eyesight's well and good at this time in my life. So I was putting 2 and 2 together, getting close enough to realize there were 4 people on this shitty country road lined up across it as if it to make a roadblock to prevent any cars from passing through. Another note to this is that I don't see any car around them that they could have come in. Don't remember any farmhouses or sheds nearby either. The rest of this encounter felt like it took place in the span of an hour because of my anxiety, but it was likely no more than 5 minutes. In hindsight, I'm driving maybe 10 as I'm getting closer and realizing that I'm definitely, without a doubt, approaching a line of 4 grown-ass people with huge bright white masks on staring in my direction. 2 of them definitely have bats or some other distinctly long blunt objects, and one person is holding something that the flashes are coming from. I've seen enough horror movies and heard enough stories about crimes on roads like this to think in that moment, I only have 2 options: slow down and hope they eventually partway around my car, running the risk that they could very well get the jump on me in my dinky car, or pick up the pace and disregard whether or not they'll have the chance to move out of the way when I potentially accelerate through them. I decided the latter. I had no means to protect myself with other than a bat in the trunk of my own car. And at the time, I was a young teen who could easily get knocked down with a solid slap because of my build. And my car was shit enough to where if I stopped, I wouldn't doubt someone could break in with easy force. Now, hearing gravel and dirt kick up from under my tires, I was more freaked out at the potential I could drive myself off the road, along with taking out some strangers who I am now dead certain are carrying bats as I accelerate towards them. I'm proper freaking out, but I've accepted that this was the decision I made from the adrenaline of fear of any situation. I accelerated more, and thankfully, the 2 that were directly in my way lunged out of the way just in time to not get hit. I stopped accelerating to catch my breath and see them in my rearview mirror. The other 2, for some reason, trying to haul us towards my car as if they could catch up. And it became so real in that moment that there were people who were intentionally trying to get the jump on me in the middle of fucking nowhere. Probably not just shit kids trying to get the kicks and giggles out of freaking someone out, but real adults trying to harm someone that came that way. I just focused on driving out of there as fast as I could. I focused on going forward, didn't turn the radio back on to distract me, and felt shook by the experience in general. The most fucked up part, honestly, was getting home and realizing that part of what I was driving on wasn't gravel. It was nails that were now embedded into my tires. Praise whatever God may be out there for me somehow having those sturdy tires. I didn't tell my parents the full story about what happened, and they just assumed I was being reckless and someone was playing a prank. I told the story to some of my friends and they told me I probably wasn't in any serious situation and they were just trying to get a scare out of me, especially since being in a car was a pretty big advantage in the situation, which I can't deny still creeped the absolute hell out of me. And I remember it every single time I drive down a road that looks any type of similarity. A few months ago, I was partaking in one of my many late drives. I usually just drive around if I'm stressed or go sit by the water to clear my mind, and it's a total mental health saver. Anyways, after about partway through my drive, I decided to go park at the entrance to a popular walking trail. I figured it was late so nobody would be there to complain about me blasting my music or relaxing in my car. Note that you drive to the trail by taking a narrow and bumpy dirt road, and the speed limit is 20 kilometers per hour, but it's full of massive potholes, so you usually have to drive pretty slow or you'll screw up your car. After navigating the narrow, pothole-ridden road like an expert pilot, I arrived at the parking lot in one piece, but much against what I expected. There were 5 or 6 cars spaced out along the parking lot's edge, and one closer to its center. This, on its own, isn't too out of the ordinary, however. It was close to 2 a.m. at this point, so I was a little creeped out, but it didn't really faze me. After I found a spot close to the middle, I noticed that none of the cars had any lights on, not inside or out. This was odd, as I'm pretty sure people don't usually go for group walks at 2 a.m. And if someone was sitting in them, you'd see the center console lights or something else light up at the very least. After all, who wants to sit in complete darkness? Not giving it much more thought, I cranked up my music and laid back while staring at the sky. Nothing happened until 20 minutes later. Like clockwork, car engines came to life and headlights cut through the dark. Each car, except for the one by the entrance, left in a line as if connected by a chain. At this point, I felt like something was off. It just didn't make sense. After seeing the line of cars leave, I figured I should head home myself, so I started up my car and began backing out of my parking space. As I did the last cars, high beams came on. This made it so that I couldn't see what I was doing, and it annoyed me, so I finished pulling out a little too quickly and went to the road. The other car followed. As I slowed down to avoid the potholes, the other car sped up. This continued until they were directly behind me. Keep in mind I still couldn't properly see as they left their high beams on. This freaked me out, so I decided to speed up drastically, and as expected, the car behind me did the same. At this point, I was traveling down the narrow road at about 60 kilometers per hour while gritting my teeth over all the expensive sounds coming from my poor car. But the car was still tailgating me. I began to freak out, slamming my gas pedal into the floorboard and attempting to speed off. But to no one's surprise, this didn't seem to shake them. We were no longer on the narrow road at this point, but rather a connecting road to the main one. I was scared. I needed to think of something fast, or I might end up on a milk carton or some missing person report. And that was all I could think about. Then I saw it. Up ahead there was a sharp turnoff onto an area that overlooks the water. Think of it like a deep shoulder that you can park in while facing the lake. This was the perfect place for me to loose the car behind me. As I got closer, I continued to speed up. I was traveling at well over 80 kilometers per hour. Then once I got a couple meters away, I slammed on my brakes and turned my wheel as sharp as I possibly could, almost ending up in the bushes. As I did so, the other car shot past me and continued down the road. I felt so relieved. After gathering myself, I pulled out and drove down to the intersection to go home. I was home free and coming down off of an adrenaline rush higher than the CN Tower. Finally the light turned green and I could go. But as I did, I saw the car driving down the side street that went to the water, and it sent chills through my spine. What if I stayed there rather than driving back? What did these people want from me? I'm truly glad I never had the opportunity to find out. I live in a county that was pretty rural until the last 10 years. The biggest town in our county is pretty crowded now, overcrowded, and I hate it. I moved from there to the countryside. I like where I live, except it can be really creepy at night because for miles and miles it's dark without any street lights. One thing about this county is that the main roads always get backed up real quick. Either there's an accident or whatever, so it pays to go the back roads. The back roads, like any other rural place, are less populated, dark, and have lots of trees. Anyway, a few years ago, something happened that almost made me stop using them. I was driving home kind of late one night. I decided to take one particular back road that shaved off 10 minutes from my commute home. I was tired and had to get up early, so I was going fast trying to get home soon. This road is a little more populated than some, but it is super spooky in some stretches because there are huge trees alongside the road and their branches and leaves make a tunnel of sorts. So I'm zipping through and round a curve. Up ahead, I see what I thought was a giant garden flag. You know the flags that people put up in spring in their yards? Well, I thought it was a weird flag because it seemed like it was fairly tall and large, and it was in the middle of the road. As I get closer, my headlights hit it, and it's not a flag. It is a person, a lady. She was wearing a red fez. I live in rural Maryland. You just don't see a fez every day. A long, flowy white dress and an orange reflective sash across her chest. A little strange because she's in the middle of the street. As I drove past her, it got weirder. As dark as it was, as I drove by, I could see she was about 60, she had glasses, and I could see her bright blue eyes. She looked in my passenger window and she started doing this weird bounce thing. I thought she was going to try and get into my car. Mind you, I'm going pretty fast. I don't know what it was about her, but she freaked me out. I didn't think she would rob me. I really thought she was a soul snatcher or a skinwalker. I honestly didn't think she was human. I can't adequately describe how creepy she was. I sped past her as fast as I could. I kept glancing in my back seat to make sure she had not materialized in my car. I prayed, recited scripture, and kept watching my rearview mirror. It was spring, so a little warm, but I felt bone-chillingly cold. I finally make it home and I run in to tell my mom the story. I got in just as my brother was telling my mom about this weird lady he saw as he was driving. It was the same lady, but he saw her at the intersection from the highway and the back road, whereas I saw her further down the road. We both had the same reaction. She also tried looking in his car. She was also bouncing around when he saw her. He said there was a car in front of him that sped off when they drove past the lady. My brother was so freaked out that he won't travel that road anymore, even during the day. Eventually I found out that the lady lives in the woods. Apparently, at one time her family lived on that road. Her father was ill and she tried to take him to the hospital. He died on the way there, and she drove around with his body in her car for hours. I guess she has mental health issues, and I think she lost the house or got kicked out. I have friends that live off of that street, so when I was talking about it, they knew exactly who it was. I still go on that road, but I haven't seen her since. I do hope she's okay, but I really do not want to run into her again. I was in a very unhealthy and toxic relationship with my ex-girlfriend for a year and a half, almost 3 years ago. Yeah, we've been separated for about 3 years now. So here's my story. I met her on Tinder, and I'm just going to call her Emma for the sake of this story. I was 18 at the time and she was 26. We chatted on Tinder for like 2 or 3 hours, and then we decided that we wanted to hang out. She was like 40 minutes away from me, though, and neither of us had cars. So I asked my mom if she would take me to her house, and I sort of just told her I was going to a friend's because there is no way in hell